A girl goes on a cross-country road trip and is forced to confront the death of her mother. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, a book that's on my 2025 TBR. I am getting to them as fast as I can. Today's book is all about a parental abandonment and dead parents. I am referring to Walk 2 Moons by Sharon Creech, which was published in 1994. For those who don't know, Sharon Creech is an American writer who has been writing since the early 90s. She sometimes writes magical realism type stories and some that are dripped in more realism and are sort of focused on young adults confronting something that has happened in their lives, like you see with Walk 2 Moons here. Sharon Creech is somewhat of a celebrated writer, as they have won a number of awards, including the Newbery Award. If you've been paying attention to this channel, you know that I love talking about Newbery winners. Particularly, books like Holes and whatnot, or A Light in the Dark, or A Wish in the Dark. I can't remember what the title is, but I love those stories, and it's always fun to explore not only Newbery literature to see if it holds up and it is every bit as good as people have once proclaimed, which sometimes it's not, but it's also important to talk about young adult literature and see what ideas and themes are being sent their way. Spoiler alert, but I'm going to tell you that I enjoyed this book quite a bit, so it seems to be another Newbery good choice on my part. But without further ado, let's talk about Walk 2 Moons. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Walk 2 Moons focuses on Salamanca Hiddle, a girl, about a teenager or something like that, who is on a road trip, as we learn at the start of this story, with her grandparents. Her mother has died, and her father is moving them from one part of the country to the other, and so her grandparents have taken her while her father has gone ahead. Salamanca seems to be having a rough time with the death of her mother, and her grandparents try to get her out of that, or distract her by having her tell a story. And so what we have here is a story within a story, a fun little narrative device. Salamanca tells her grandparents about a girl named Phoebe that she knew. She talks about meeting Phoebe's parents and how Phoebe's parents were kind of strange. Her father didn't really seem that interested in family events, and her mother seemed kind of absent or something like that. She was distant. She didn't. Sal felt that Phoebe's mother wasn't loved by everyone in the family, and so there was some hurt in Phoebe's mother's eyes, which Sal could kind of relate to, I guess. But one day, a strange young man shows up at their doorstep and wants to know if he can talk to Phoebe's mom. Phoebe and Sal are home alone at this point, so they're like, she's not here, go away. And Phoebe worries that this young man is a potential lunatic, gonna hurt the family in some way, and so much of her future actions at this point are kind of decided on how to get the lunatic out of her mind or out of the neighborhood or something like that. As Sal is sort of interacting with Phoebe and going to school, she's kind of flinched she flinches when she's touched. She worries what that means to her, and when she tells her father is sad for her and hugs her. And it should be noted that not only has Phoebe, or has Sal's mother, died, but she abandoned the family at some point. She just left and chose to go across the country, and Sal's kind of dealing with that heartbreak, in addition to the further heartbreak of her mother having died after that had happened. Back in the present, her grandmother and grandfather stop at a river. They're kind of accosted by a stranger who wants to know why they're kind of swimming in the nearby river. And at that point, her grandmother is bitten by a snake, poisonous snake. They have to suck out the poison. They take her to the hospital, and she manages to recover. But at that point, Sal continues on with the story, talking about how Phoebe's mom at this point goes missing. Nobody can find her. Her father is kind of worried, but there's nothing he can really do. It seems like Phoebe's mom left on her own accord, which Phoebe doesn't like, and Sal wants to get her to see because she's familiar with that pain of being abandoned by a parent in some way. Sal also recalls a story of her mom being pregnant, and at the time of the birth, the baby was choked by the umbilical cord and died, and that left her mom sad. And Sal kind of understands why, at least some of the reasons why her mom might have left, even though it doesn't make her any happier to know that kind of thing. At this point, Sal again continues on with the story, recalling that Phoebe and Sal learned the name of the lunatic that they see going about, and they track him down to a college where they see Phoebe's mom hanging out with this lunatic, this guy named Mike, and Phoebe is concerned that her mom is having an affair with this young man, which makes her unhappy. And when she goes back home, she can't really bring herself to tell her father what's happening. But Phoebe's mom actually does return home and brings this young man with her. And it's at this point that that Phoebe's mom reveals that this young man, Mike, is her son, that she had to give up for adoption before she got married. And she thinks that she didn't want to tell her husband because she thought it would bring shame. But her husband is like, yeah, I don't know what made you think I would treat you like that. I'm welcoming this child into the family if he wants to be there. And so the family is kind of reunited in a happy way, which Sal is hopeful about, but she's still feeling a little heartbreak about everything. And back in the present, while she's finishing up the story, Grandpa tries to wake up her grandmother, and it turns out her grandmother has had a stroke. They take her to the hospital, and they have to stay overnight. Sal realizes that she's not too far from the place where her mom died. And so Sal is given the keys by her grandfather to just search the car for some things, but she actually takes it into Idaho and goes and finds her mom's grave. She first sees where her mom died in a bus accident, and then she goes to her mom's grave and feels a great sense of relief. And she also talks about Mrs. Cadaver, Margaret Cadaver, a character in this story, who her father is sort of seeing, which we initially think that Sal doesn't like because Margaret Cadaver is maybe a replacement for her mother in some way. But we find out that the bus accident that killed her mom, Mrs. Cadaver, Margaret Cadaver, was also on the bus. And she was the only survivor. And so that has something to do with why Sal doesn't want to really be around her. But Sal feels a sense of relief and forgives, or is willing to accept Margaret Cadaver into her life. And then she heads back to Idaho, where she learns that her grandmother has died, which is a sad moment for both her and her grandfather, who lost a wife of many years. And then at that point, Sal, the end of the story happens, as the story comes to a close, Sal goes to live in Idaho with her father, a new start, and her grandfather stays with them too, and she sort of understands the perspectives of others better, and she has some friends in Phoebe and others that provides a little bit more meaning and happiness in her life, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Walk Two Moons. One of the main themes that Sharon Creech is touching upon here is that of grief and trauma, which are heavy topics to present to young adults, but Sharon Creech is doing a great job of sort of enveloping it into the story and treating her readers like adults, which is not something you often see with young adult literature, unfortunately. But it's important to note that Sal is stuck in a state of sadness after the death of her mother. Not only the death of her mother, as I've been pointing out, the abandonment by her mother. Her mother wasn't happy in the family. She didn't feel like she belonged in some capacity, and her marriage, wasn't going that great, especially after the death of her child who was born. And so Sal is, or not Sal, but her mother leaves. And so Sal is sort of abandoned, and that's not easy for any child to go through. And so what this results in is trouble connecting with others, including Margaret Cadaver. The difficult relationship with Margaret that we initially think is due to having to do with Margaret kind of taking a motherly role in her life, or being in a relationship with her father for some unknown reason that we don't find out till later. But we initially find out it's because of the connection with the death of her mother in some way. And we also see, she flinches when being touched. It's hard for her to just be there. It's hard for her to sort of cope with all this loss that she's been going through. And it's produced a number of, negative mental health effects for her, and problematic thinking as well. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. I had not said anything about what had happened the day before, about being scared down to my very bones when I thought they had left me. I didn't know what came over me. Ever since my mother left us that April day, I suspected that everyone was going to leave one by one, which is very sad to hear from a young child such as Sal here. But it's what happens, when someone leaves, when your environment is inconsistent in that way. So you can see right there a really good illustration of how this is kind of changing her for now, and what work she might have to do in order to reach a better state of mind. And I do think that this sort of grief and trauma that Sal is feeling is brought to mind. She's forced to confront it when she witnesses Phoebe's situation where her mother leaves, and she sees that Phoebe is unable to really cope with that and unwilling to accept what happened. And sure, Phoebe is right in that her mother didn't really leave, but the fact that she did leave temporarily without any explanation at all has left Phoebe feeling kind of sour about everything, and rightfully so. And as Sal, thinks more about Phoebe and her own situation, there's a growing awareness of how this grief, how this trauma has affected her and has sort of left her kind of worse for the wear. She's forced to really confront what happened to her, and the sadness and the fear, and because it's all sort of presented in this sort of meta narrative of a road trip, she can appropriately reflect on what's happening and what she's really thinking and what she's really feeling, and how maybe some of that isn't justified, and maybe she can kind of understand why her mother left, even if that still makes her sad. And so there's a sense of resolution for her in exploring this story with her grandparents, but there's an even greater resolution upon seeing the grave. It's partially the case, that grief will never really go away, but there's also that need of resolution. She wasn't able to sort of talk with her mother after her mother left, and she lost that opportunity completely when her mother died, but she can still visit her grave. And I believe, as Creech notes in the story for Sal, that there's that sense that never having seen her mother's body, never having been to the grave, there's still that sense that her mother might come back. And so there's that unspoken need for resolution. And so when she sees the grave, it's like, oh, that's it. That's the finality of it. And she's able to sort of cope and at least attempt to heal upon seeing that. So I feel like that's important to note. Like, you're never going to fix the situation by seeing the grave, but you're going to feel better about it. You're going to get on the path to recovery on feeling better and getting over this grief that you're dealing with. But as Creech also notes, that sadness never really leaves, and that's really an important message to send to young adults, because they're going to feel sad a lot of times in their lives, and they might think like, oh, why am I not getting over this sadness? And the truth is, like, someone can have such a deep impact in your life that you're not able to get over it. And even if you feel like you're in a better state, you're still going to feel that sadness throughout your life, and that's okay. Like, that's just the part of the human experience, and sort of not letting young people know about that can lead to some difficulty in their lives with coping with these kinds of things, and with sort of dealing with their emotions. So Creech is doing a lot of good work with her writing here. Another idea that Creech touches upon in this story is the idea of walking 2 moons, which is the title of the story. And what she means by that is a full quote, which is like, you can't really judge someone until you've walked 2 moons in their moccasins. Walk a mile in their shoes. It's the ultimate point is understanding the perspective of others. And Sal does try to understand the perspective of others, as we see in the story, but she's kind of blocked by her own grief, especially when trying to understand her mother, which she can't really, because she's kind of torn apart by the abandonment of it all. She can't really understand why her father would want to hang out with or develop a romantic relationship with Margaret Cadaver, because if he's able to get over this, so why can't she? But even more so than that, like, did her mother have such little impact in her father's life that he's able to simply replace her? And that's not really what he's doing, but that's all Sal can really see, because she hasn't developed that ability to see from another person's perspective. But as we see in the story, this trip that her grandparents are taking her on, it's really helping her to develop that perspective. They ask her a lot of questions, which is very wholesome, I would say, in this story. And she's able to sort of confront all of these things she's been thinking and feeling, especially one story where her mother gave birth to a child that died immediately, and Sal is able to sort of understand that perspective and understand why her mom might have been sad, why her mom might not have wanted to be in that relationship because she lost a child, and how things could have been hard for her and why she might have needed to leave. Again, not really condoning that leaving, not really sort of being okay with that leaving, but understanding why that might have happened. Walking 2 moons in her shoes. And that applies not only to this character, but multiple other characters in this story. So understanding another person's perspective is definitely part of the overarching sort of message of this book. Another interesting aspect of the story is Margaret Cadaver. She seems to be a symbol of pain in this story. Because she Sal doesn't really want to be around her. And at first, again, we think this is because Margaret Cadaver is forming a relationship with her father. And so you wonder, why, why doesn't Sal want to be around her? And the answer is maybe because, again, she hasn't gotten over the loss of her mom, and it's difficult to see other people kind of trying to fill that role, even if Margaret Cadaver isn't completely trying to fill that role. But as we find out later in the story, there's another reason why Sal doesn't want to be around Margaret, and that's because her mom died in a bus crash, and Margaret's Cadaver was the only survivor of that bus crash. So to see Margaret Cadaver is a constant reminder of how she'll never get to see her mom again. It's like, why did Margaret survive, but my mother didn't? It doesn't feel fair to Sal. Again, it's even further unfair because, again, her father is kind of choosing Margaret here. Another sort of loss in a way. It's an amazing reveal on Creech's part. How you're left thinking oh, this is just another story of like a father moving on after kind of ending a relationship with a woman, and the daughter not being happy. But there's so much more depth to this story, a very fascinating sort of way that changes what we know about both characters here, it sort of adds more dimensions to why her father would want to be with Margaret Cadaver, because, it helps him, be closer to his dead wife in the process. And so it is an amazing reveal on Creech's part. It definitely hit me pretty hard when I was reading it. It made me feel quite a bit. And I don't think I've read anything that sort of stands out in that way before. Another thing that I like about this story is the great characterization, not only of Sal, but of her father, but of Phoebe, of Mrs. Winterbottom, Phoebe's mom, of Margaret, and of her grandparents, especially her grandparents. As they're going on the trip, her grandparents are very kind, very nice people. And the way that they're asking questions and the interest that they have in Sal's story is very, very wholesome in a way that it feels very human. in the way that they're asking questions, and it's very difficult to write human characters sometimes because you really have to bring them off the page, and the way that her grandparents are written is well done on Sharon Creech's part. So adding layers to characters and making them feel vibrant and warm is definitely something that helps make this story stand out. Now, while I do think the meta-narrative of the story within the story is really good, I do think it needs sort of better integration, where in a way that kind of maybe adds more suspense to whether Sal is going to fully recover over what happens. Maybe sort of taking the grandparents' story to the end or something like that could maybe help the themes carry through a little bit better. But I don't think it's that bad. I just think the meta narrative could be reworked in a little way that makes the story sort of flow more. But as it stands, it's not really harming the story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. A high-quality story, definitely worthy of the Newbery, in my opinion. And it has quite a bit that young people can take away from this story. And even adults, too. You know, it's something that I think every age can really benefit from reading. So I definitely recommend that you seek this out. Maybe find it at your local library or purchase it, which would be great for contributing to the success of various authors. So yeah, if you have anything to say about my review here, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a potential conversation about such things. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe so that more people can find out about Walk Two Moons or this author if they don't already know. Otherwise, join the Discord as well, so that we can talk about other forms of media or books or whatever you want to talk about. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and perspective-seeking travels. Farewell.